We believe in equality. Competition for everyone. We will make it easy to compete, but hard to win. Because that's what every great sport should be. We want to level the playing field. We want to find out what good actually means. Because only then can you know how good you really are. We believe in gaming. We believe in gamers. Join us.
Okay, is everyone ready? Everyone want to take a seat? For those of you tuning in via Twitch, welcome back to the Valencia eSports Congress, powered by Twitch. And I am your moderator for the day, Paul Challoner, aka Red Eye. My job today is simple and straightforward. I'm not here to give the guys a terrifically hard time, although I might do. I'm not here to upset anyone, but I am here to provoke a response and to get people talking and having a debate. Hopefully this first panel will enlighten people throughout the esports world and on the internet about our world, the esports world. So let me introduce you to the panelists for our first segment, which is esports as a global phenomenon Will eSports survive without an international body similar to FIFA? First out, please, welcome the founder and owner of NASL, the North American Star League, Russel Pfister. Good morning. Also, the Secretary General of the International Esports Federation, Suk Oh. Great to have you here. And to a man who owns a very large team in esports, Team Evil Geniuses, please welcome Garfield. Again, nice to see you, Alex. Head of esports at DreamHack, Tomas Hermansson. Morning. How you doing? And last but by very not least, the General Manager in Esports and VP of R&D at IGN, David Ting. Okay, so the way this panel is going to work, and the way similar panels will work through the day, is that the opening question is the overarching question of this session, and will be posed to each man individually, and they will get 1 minute to answer in their own words, without challenge from any of the other panelists, what they think the answer is to this particular question. So if we can start with Russel Pfister first, the question is, will esports survive without an international body similar to FIFA?
I think in like StarCraft 2, we've seen things like Kespa trying to, does that mean?
We'll fix the sound issue, sorry.
Okay. I think any sort of organization body that wants to hold everyone a closed environment isn't good. Is that me still banging on the audio? So no, I don't think we need a international body unless it's open. Anything that wants to try to close esports to one particular group or one particular area holding players in one league, I don't think is a good thing. I think esports seems to be more like a tennis model or a boxing model where you can have multiple belts or multiple crowns, multiple events. That's my opinion on the governing body.
Okay. And Juan, are you in agreement with that, or do you have a different opinion?
I briefly explain myself. That's very self-explanatory why I'm here. Okay. I actually made World Cup games. I was in World Cup games since 2000. And I left World Cup games at the beginning of 2009. The reason why I felt some limitation as a private sponsored esports organizer, I should do something with some public side. That means is some one company or the big sponsor shake the esports in their way. That means is they want to use esports not as sports. They want to treat it as a marketing tool. So I left World Cup game and I made IeSF, International Esports Federation. And under the IeSF, by this year we have the 40 member countries. Each member country has their own association and federation. They are sponsored and designated by their each government. So I'm here to explain the reason why I'm here.
Okay. So I think in general, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you generally think that a governing body like FIFA is a good thing?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, Garfield.
I think that esports will certainly survive without a governing body, but I think we absolutely need one. I tend to agree with Russell that the best analogy for the esports model is golf, tennis. I think there are ways to adjust those models to better fit ours. But I think that the lack of a governing body really limits our ability to grow and monetize our product in a variety of ways, from broadcast analytics sharing, which would affect everyone's sponsorship pitches in a dramatic way, to negotiating with developers, allowing them to help us better, allowing us to help them better, allowing us to more effectively launch new games as esports titles. Things like media rights and media revenue sharing, and many others. These are all things we simply cannot do and cannot monetize effectively right now because we don't have a unified product.
Okay. And Tomas from DreamHack.
Yeah, I think international federation is needed because I see different threats to esports, and one of them is actually the pros being divided to the amateurs, who feels that it's really a huge mass of amateurs, but it's kind of few professionals right now, and the gap is just increasing. The other threat is esport could be more of a show business in the end, where similar to maybe professional poker or let's say some other small sports, and I feel that esports is actually a grassroots thing, and we can be so much more than just being a show business. So I think an international federation is needed. I'm not sure how and when, but certain standards and structures are needed to get esports further within the 5 or 10 years we have ahead.
Okay. David, what's your view on this?
So I started doing esports very late in the game. So going through this, I'm one of the still wet behind the ears. So in my mind, I think an open market is actually essential, because I think a lot of the innovations that you see, like basically revolutionize the industry, is something we haven't seen yet. Having an international body at this time will actually slow things down, and I believe will actually be harmful for basically this renaissance that's happening right now. I think the timing is basically eventual to answer the governing body. I think at a certain time, economics would dictate that there's basically going to be consolidation. There was certain organization that will be big enough that basically will drive that body. And I think right now it's too early to have that, because I think it will add so much bureaucracy that it's going to basically hold us back in terms of innovation.
Okay. That's an interesting opening. If I can come back to you, Alex, from a team manager's and a team owner's point of view, what does the governing body look like? Is it made up of players? Is it made up of teams? Is it made up of sponsors, tournaments? Who runs that governing body?
I'll return to the PGA analogy because I think it's excellent. In my understanding of things, in the mid-20th century, essentially the top 200 or so players in golf recognized that their industry was fractured. It was very similar to where we are now, with hundreds of players. Obviously, there are teams in esports that play a vital role as well, but there were hundreds of players rather in golf, unaffiliated, dozens of tournaments unaffiliated, and the players kind of lumped together their rights. They created a holding company, which is the PGA. They used it to negotiate with the tournaments and started out with a basic independent company in the middle to regulate things. And I think that model is quite good here. I think that an independent company in the middle, even to start out with just some very basic things that wouldn't limit the industry's growth and wouldn't smother people, could do wonders. I think, once again, I'll go back to the example of broadcast analytics. So right now, I think every team in the entire industry is significantly hampered in terms of actually pitching sponsorship as a pro sports team. When EG pitches a sponsorship, it is not as a pro sports team right now. It is as a media company, as a marketing agency, because we really have no overall analytics to show, for example, how many logo shots these logos in this shirt will see. So we actually in our marketing pitches don't talk very much at all about logos on shirts, which is crazy, because if you look at all the analogous sports, NASCAR, golf, tennis, the sponsorships are so crucial. And all the companies that invest in those sports, in those players, in those teams, they audit the metrics on all of these logos so heavily. And we have zero ability to do that because there's no kind of unified database of broadcast analytics that is accurate, that everyone in the industry, from teams to independent players to tournaments, leagues, could use to grow their own sponsorship bases. Okay.
Russell, do you agree with that? Or are the tournaments, I guess what I'm saying is do the players need the tournaments, or do the tournaments need the players?
I think it goes hand in hand. I mean, the platform for the players and the teams are the leagues. So for the NASCAR analogy, the cars platform is the racetrack. So there's branding on the racetrack, there's branding on the cars. That's all what makes it go around. So they definitely go hand in hand, and that's the platform. That when Evil Geniuses wins a tournament, it's that they're on IPL stage and they're at DreamHack and ESL they were seen in these sort of places. But I think those numbers are available too. I mean, asking the other tournaments for these numbers, I think you could actually put that together.
I would respectfully disagree. I think there's a lot of fluff in public press releases. It's not nearly the amount of accuracy you need to sell a deal. I think even if, like, you know, once again, to go back to basic boundaries, like right now we don't really even have an established kind of uniform set of guidelines for, like, who owns, you know, what about, for example, in a player bubble, as kind of I describe it. Like, who owns the rights to have products on a table at an event, you know? I've gone head-to-head with, I would say, various tournaments over the years about our energy drink sponsorship from Monster and what we can and cannot have. And it varies from tournament to tournament based on who's sponsored by whom.
Sure.
My argument is that...
But that's no different to normal sports, surely.
What was that?
I mean, in other sports, that's no different.
I don't think so. I think that there are more established guidelines for what the tournament has the rights to sell, and I think a really great example is, for a while, in Korea with GomTV and the GSL, they had a requirement for Razer headsets to be on the players.
Yeah.
And that was, I felt, a huge overstep, because essentially in selling their Razer sponsorship, they had sold something they don't own the rights to, which is what the players wear. Someone like EG or other teams own the rights to that. So there are no real guidelines for what tournaments and teams...
And do you believe that that would be the rule of a federation or an international body that would put that together?
I agree with David that it cannot be overzealous initially, because you would then end up smothering the industry. But I think very basic things like that are no-brainers. Broadcast analytics sharing, basic rules over who owns what rights to what sponsorships and how to sell those sponsorships could do wonders for the industry.
Okay. I mean, that's very much the marketing side of it. But what about Juan, in terms of the rule sets? I mean, you've been very instrumental with the IeSF to make rules common across lots of different games. Is that a rule of a body?
Yes, that's the area we think is very important when we make esports as like a sports. Compared with the other general sports, esports actually has very limited international internalization in terms of the rules and regulations, and the players, and referees, and even game titles. When we say the international standardization, if we do not succeed in terms of international standardization, we cannot make esports as like in a sports. Okay? You have your European rule. Korea has Korean own rule. America is America's own, their own rule, right? So even we do a very buzz event in each continent, but mankind as a whole don't know, and very limited the community enjoy their games, right? So international standardization in terms of rules and regulations, referees and players, as well as in game titles, is very important when we make the governing body for the esports.
And in terms of the IeSF itself, do you, the perception that I've had back from Western world esports fans is that it's fairly toothless, that it doesn't really have any reach. For instance, so how are you able to grow the IeSF into maybe a federation that then includes, for instance, the IPL, the NASL, DreamHack, MLG, and what have you? How do you do that?
When we say the international governing body for esports, what is the proper structures for esports? We have to think about that. Okay? There is a very specific 3 types of international governing bodies in the world, right? The structure of IOC, as you said, the structure of FIFA, and also the structure of F1. They are all the international governing body, but their structure is very specific. The contents in there, right? IOC is very globally but non-profit, very oriented non-profit organization. But FIFA is a semi. But F1 is like the company.
Yeah.
Okay? They are very profit-oriented in terms of marketing, in terms of their the business-wise.
Yeah.
Right.
So F1 has a different marketing arm
Right,
anyway.
right. So we have to study which way is the proper way for esports.
Okay.
When we make the international governing body, right? And also, we have very, very different structures from the existing the sports organization, because the game title has an owner. But the existing sports, there is no owners for the sports. The football and basketball and volleyball, there is no owners. But we have our owners in terms of the publishers and developers. So that area is also very important for us to think about when we make how we organize the international governing body for esports.
Okay.
Preferably incorporated with the esports.
Sorry, Juan, I want to bring Tomas in. Tomas, as a person who has been in the media for quite a while within esports, you started Rakaka. You've also worked with DreamHack for the last 3 years as well, so you've got a very balanced view of both sides of the fence, as it were. Where do you see this federation, if there is such a federation that we need? I mean, I'll come back to Russel in a minute with his points, but if a federation was made, is it the IeSF or is it another company? Are the IeSF too Korean-focused, for instance, or are they toothless, as some of the people have said out in the esports world? And how do they engage you as a tournament?
I would say that right now DreamHack is really focused on our own business and what we're doing, and we're a bit cynical about it. So we're really just listening to the community, trying to do what the players and the teams want, and try to keep that dialogue open all the time. But we are for sure internally interested in the international federation ideas, and I'm not sure how to really start it up and all that. I think that the start should be rules, ranking, and that kind of stuff. And I think that you should start on a level where teams have their association, maybe events have their association, and maybe players, or so you create these different layers of organizations. That's at least my personal opinion about that.
Alex, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I just want to make a distinction here. I think that there are multiple entities in the esports space that would love to be the governing body. And I think the question is, well, what is the incentive to go with one over the other? And it's not just two, it's multiple ones. And I think one really important distinction to make is like, well, okay, you talk about, say there's a particular company that, provides uniform guidelines and rules and format for a bunch of events around the world, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if that company doesn't have all the events under its umbrella, it is called a tournament. It's a tournament circuit. Yeah. If it has all the events under its umbrella, it's a governing body. And that's, I think a lot of people, when they talk about governing body, they focus on the rules, uniformity, and stuff like that. And I obviously want to bring in the other things that I mentioned before, but strictly focusing on that, that's a very basic difference between the two. And so the question that I think you raised, and was just discussed, is, well, what is the incentive to pick one over the other? Personally, I don't think it's any company or entity that exists right now. I mean, even if I'm correct, I believe both the IOC and FIFA, when they were originally formed, were private companies. Okay. Which is
if any of you guys want to challenge anyone, by the way, feel free. You don't have to come back to me. You can just get stuck in and you can have a conversation.
I'll go last.
We'll just sit back here and let you guys talk. We're fine.
Okay, since you opened that up, so I'm going to jump in. So for me, it's actually very simple because I'm a math guy, engineering guy. So the thing you want to focus on is the flow of money. And I think that's really, what the problem is today. So right now, if we all go in and basically there's a lot of leagues and there are certain ones that are very marketable. And I think this is where open market actually helps because it's going to be survival of the fittest. I think over time what happened is the guys who are driven by passion, who cannot create the brand and establish an identity, will get washed out. And what will happen is the guys who actually know how to create a marketing identity for themselves, where the brands feel like it's a must-buy, and that's basically the arm race that's happening right now, basically become stronger. And I think that the eventual natural evolution of these is that a couple of these entities, it's probably based on continent, because I think it's going to be continentally focused. Basically will create alliances or some sort of, a natural forming body where, it's economically driven, where there's benefits to do this, where we can basically have amateur players fly, or subsidized to come to tournaments. So to basically allow a new generation of players to play. Also starting like summer camps, for video gaming, where kids can learn the, right way to play games early on. So these type of diversion of funds to basically, investing in longevity of esport is absolutely necessary. And you just really have to watch, the economics behind it. So, I think that, a lot of people will basically come up and say, hey, we're the governing arm. But the thing that basically will make people listen is basically economic power behind such entities that basically tie themselves together, that basically could make those things happen for the younger generation of players, for existing players and teams to basically, be tied in somehow. Like if you look at the professionals, they basically are really, it's not really the rules that count. It's really about tying the economic, wants and do's and wants together and be able to market it together. Like FIFA is really a marketing body. You think the rules are important? No, it's actually the marketing aspect, getting the big dollar sponsorship because it's a combined entity that's much more important.
No, there's a lot of pieces here. I mean, one, I think, for any sort of esports, it has to be viable for the player. That the player has to, decide to go into esports, not just because it's what they were doing. They had no other option. They were playing too many games, and this was the best path they had. I think they need the support of teams, and having teams around makes it viable. The problem I see with any one international organization is they all have an angle on it, whether they're trying to insert themselves between the teams and the leagues or teams and the players. And if they provide a great value, there's something that they bring to the table. But if they don't, they're just in the money equation, sticking themselves in the middle and playing, all sides against it. As far as the rules go, esports isn't, there's so many different things to have an international same rule set, I think, is actually kind of more boring. That as long as, if the only person that would have a play would be the publisher and say, these are certain rules we want to see. So every organization being able to do what's best, and I think you can't ignore the broadcast side. If that's what is driving the monetization, we want, certain games are good for television, certain games aren't, and maybe the format dictates how that would go. I think there's definitely some sort of way that, as far as wanting to show different leagues and a worldwide champion, there could be a piece that could do that way as far as, a ranking system or something like that. But I think it's too early right now. If someone wants to drive value, work with teams, that their rules are their rules. But I think anything else kind of stagnates the ability to innovate.
Yeah, I want to add on to Russell's point. I believe the publishers, for the long health of their game franchise, I think it makes sense to basically for them to establish like a scoring system, integrate it into the game itself, so people have the incentive to participate in the tournaments, and the players basically aspire, especially the amateur players. You never know when you're good enough to basically enter the pro scenes and you want to dip your toes in the water. I think it's the responsibility for the leagues as well as the publisher to really encourage that type of activity, to really jump into the semi-pro and from graduating from the semi-pro to the pro scene. I think that's really healthy and basically allows a long-term viability to the sport. In terms of the rules themselves, I'm a simple person. I never, if I look at it, I only read page 1. I don't read the whole thing. I think the simpler the better. And I think really just focus on the economics for the players as well as for the leagues and the teams. Really just, to figure out a good way to carve it out. And I think the natural market's going to drive that. I don't think a centralized body is going to really be able to drive anything at this point. It's, again, like I said, it's too early.
I would respectfully disagree with that. I think that, like I said before, there are certain fundamental elements of our culture right now that simply cannot be monetized at all or properly, given how fragmented the current landscape is. And I think kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, which is, okay, well, if we have, say in theory that is possible to do, there are a couple things. We focus on unifying for the purpose of standardizing certain formatting things, certain production things, as well as some of the other things that I mentioned. The question is, okay, who is it and how do we commit to it? I think that there are only two ways to determine who that is and how it's committed to. A is the developer either helping to create it or committing to it. And Me? Bad? Okay.
Yeah.
And the other would be there actually being some kind of capital behind it. I mean, I think right now, what I don't think is possible right now, to comment on your guys' perception of the timeline, is to get everyone to commit to something that has actually no tangible change of funds. Like, there needs to be a legally binding agreement between an independent holding company, governing body company, and on one side, events, on the other side, teams and players, and there needs to be an actual exchange of funds and services so that it's legally binding, even if it's very, very basic at the start.
Okay, so you see a federation is more like a hierarchy thing where there's lots of other sub-areas. So, for instance, a players' union. Well, we've been talking about a players' union for many years.
There needs to be a players' union. There needs to be a teams' union. There needs to be an events' union.
Okay, that's very interesting. I want to turn our attention a little bit towards the money side of the business in terms of prize money in particular. Prize money has escalated quite a lot recently. We had, through the mid-2000s, it went up through the roof and then it came back down again. We had the $1 million CPL World Tour in 2005. And then things kind of just slowed down a little bit after the CGS stuff and came back to what people consider to be a more normal level, if you like. But recently we've seen both Riot and Valve put an awful lot of money into video gaming and produce some really, really enormous prize money. I'm collectively interested in all of your thoughts on what is the right level of prize money? Is there a right level of prize money? And does high prize money from other tournaments destroy other tournaments? David, do you want to take that one first?
Sure. I think, again, on the economics of it, I think the publishers definitely had an incentive to drive their game sales and drive, the popularity of the game, and they're investing in the prize money in esports. I do think that the prize money that's introduced by Riot and Valve are high, in respect of what...
Sorry, David, you said they're high, but are they irresponsible?
Too high. I'm sorry?
Is that irresponsible?
I think that they can afford it, because given like Riot's business model, I think it's very at the peak of, it could actually be a new peak, but then right now it looks like it's a peak of their current business, so they can afford it. But the key question is that basically, spending it all in one shot is not something I agree with. I'd rather have it spread out over the long haul. So if you spend $25 million over a course of 1 year, and next year you basically cut it back to like $2 million, it's actually not healthy. I'd rather have basically a slow growth, like kind of you ramp up over time, versus basically feast or famine. So right now I think a lot of the teams basically are expecting the $1 million plus payout. And I think that's not sustainable, at least from a team perspective, league perspective, be able to afford that level of prizing with the level of sponsorship there today. And I think, again, I think it's unhealthy. And then you'd rather take a look at the long-term view and basically, continue to grow the size of the community and really just strategically invest, especially on the people who cannot afford to go to the tournament. Instead of, investing in the flashes of the world, you basically should invest in the guys who cannot travel and basically subsidize their way to be there so that it will be a more open and fair competition.
And in terms of, I've cited Valve and Riot, I didn't mean to sort of pick on them as such. There are plenty of other producers obviously doing the same kind of thing. And it's not really picking on them as such, it's just a point in time right now that they're putting a lot of money in. How do you get them to the table? Is a federation the answer? Is that what's going to bring them in? Is it them that actually need to lead that federation?
Again, it's the way I look at it is open market, right? So each one of the leagues basically sell a set of services to the publishers. So the publisher basically look at those services and say like, hey, does it really help sell the games? Is there really ROI behind that investment, right? So if there is a ROI where we can move a lot of copies of the game by the efforts that we're doing, then there's reason to invest in this economy,
sure.
Right? So I think the multi-million-dollar level, I think it's still too early for this stage. But then if you actually derive the equation and have basically the length of time to show like, hey, eSports does sell copies of the game. Hey, eSports does sell virtual goods, and also for people to re-up subscriptions, right? So if you have a couple of case studies like that, then I would think that more people will come in and invest in it.
Okay.
I think that approaching it from that angle is kind of like partially what's wrong about what we're doing right now. It's like right now I think the developers are largely looking at esports as, well, okay, this is really a marketing spend. I think even for Riot, who's spending quite a lot of money, I think that there's no definite format for how they're absolutely going to make that money back and then profit on it next year. It's this kind of like, okay, well, this is a very interesting kind of emerging thing, and it's obviously good for us, and it's obviously good for us long term, so let's put this much in. What we cannot do right now with such a fractured structure is go to a developer and say, here is our unified body. We have this company in the middle. We have this plan. It will profit $5 million this year. Here is your cut. Making you money on the actual sports culture. Nothing to do with selling copies of the game.
It's interesting you raised that. You had an interview with Forbes earlier this year, and you said, and I quote, once this gets bigger and bigger, tournaments go from being the building stages to actually posting profits. Those profits will absolutely have to be shared with the talent, the teams, the players, the broadcast.
Yes.
And that's pretty much what you're saying now
Yes.
in terms of the same
Right.
thing.
We can't have a revenue sharing structure without a unified product. We can't have a unified product without a holding company or governing body.
Okay, how do you feel about that, Russell? As a tournament organizer, do you believe the teams and the broadcasters and the players should share in that profit?
I think they should. I mean, I think as far as, that's why you want a vibrant ecosystem. You want good enough prize pools to where it's worth it for the player. But it has to make sense. It ultimately is a marketing tool. I mean, at the highest prize levels are really just a new ceiling so they can say this is the highest. It's just that bullet point. Beyond that, it's a marketing spend. I think it's the same reason if it's too high, it doesn't make any sense either if it's not sustainable, because then there's nothing for players next time. I think the danger in some of this stuff is people are already cutting the loot of what potentially is out there before anyone's got it. And to say that organizations need to have a back-end share on something when everyone's fighting to have the bags of money in the back that they're going to split.
Yeah, exactly.
I think to your point earlier that if you're the car and we're the racetrack, that's the sponsorships. There's a platform to be able to provide something of value and get services as a team for that. The players, in addition to that, helping your team, you have this prize money. That right now and the sort of things they're benefiting from the travel and a chance to win a purse beyond being on a team, and they get certain perks and a salary for being on that team. There is an ecosystem there that I believe works without having, to say a big sponsor comes to your team. Is there a percentage that goes to the leagues and the publishers because you're working together? It's kind of a back door that no one really wants on their bottom line.
I don't think you can. I agree with you. I don't think you can actually structure it that way. It wouldn't make sense with how it's fractured right now. There's no real way to objectively split that up without a unified product. In terms of the quote that you cited, I want to say that in terms of that part of the way a unified body could work, I do think it's too early to implement that kind of revenue sharing, because I think it has to come when everyone is actually profitable and everyone is still growing right now.
And I'm glad you raised that, because the sort of question that's sort of leading on to all of this is that if we're not ready for a federation or a body right now, when will we be ready? Is it a year away? Is it 5 years away? Is it 20 years away?
Like I said, I think we're ready for it right now, but only for very specific basic things. I don't think complete revenue sharing structure.
But not every one of you seems to agree. I mean, David, you don't agree?
No, I think it's still fairly early. I think we're at least 5 to 10 years away. The way I look at this, again, is there has to be a for-profit operation, right? So, again, following the trail of money, tournament has to be profitable, in order to basically start to work with the teams, buying out the player pool like the pros. So if you look at sports and history of sports, there's always a period of consolidation that happens naturally over time, dictated by the economics of it, where basically a player will create unions, like leagues will basically start to combine. And I think it's still too early, because right now we're in a hyper-growth area. So when the growth basically stalls, that's basically when the consolidation will happen, and those natural tendency will go. And this is why I'm cautiously optimistic. I think it's 5 and 10 years, because I believe that there's still tremendous growth ahead.
Okay, that's interesting. And in terms of the IeSF warrant, do you think your Korean focus makes you difficult for these guys to interact with you and come on board and listen to what you have to say about an international federation? I mean, you have Korean sponsors. You're pretty predominant in Korea. I know that you have 40 members, but some of those members don't exist anymore, and some of them have fallen by the wayside, particularly the UK and the US, and they don't really have any connection to these guys running tournaments either.
When I established International eSports Federation in 2009 with the 9 founding member countries, I funded half of our the money from the government, from the Korean government, and half from the private companies, the donation, not sponsorship, but donation. Okay. So we continually operate our event with a non-profit organization. But now we think about how we can continually operate this kind of structures. I have a chance to meet OCA, the senior director of the OCA. The OCA is the Olympic Committee of Asia.
Yep.
They have the Asian game, Olympic game, in 2014 in Korea, Incheon. 1 year before the Asian game, the OCA usually hold the Asian Indoor Games. Asian Indoor Games, their title, some of the title they want to make the official game. They test bed. They use the Asian Indoor Game as their test bed. The reason I met them is I wanted to include the eSports in their indoor games. And when I met the senior director of the Olympic, the committee director, and they are very interested in. And also they are very concerned about the eSports structures. And they asked me, do you have the Asian governing body? Do you have the European governing body? Do you have the international referee? When they do some the esports games in their indoor game, you can dispatch international referee designated by the international esports governing body. So they're asking, inspire me, we have to make our own governing body, which IeSF is now pursuing.
Yeah. But how do you get these guys? How do you get the Western world to come and join that? How do you get them involved?
If the indoor games in Asia will be succeeded, then I can apply the same structures. There's a European Olympic Committee and also the American Olympic Committee. Each continent has their own Olympic Committee,
yeah. And
they have their own some kind of structures of indoor games. And if we subsequently export the same structure of the indoor game in Asia, we can organize the esports in a very global scale by the supporting from each government.
Okay.
The government fund.
So, I mean, I'm getting a sense that actually it doesn't include the other guys. So how do we get everyone on the table? How do we get everyone to talk together? I mean, how do we get IGN to come and talk? How do we get NASL? How do we get DreamHack? How do we get all the other tournaments that are out there to kind of follow a rule set, one set of regulations, one guide for players, one treatment of players? How does that happen with the IeSF? Or is the IeSF very much focused on trying to get this esport thing in with the Olympics?
IeSF, my mission, I think my mission is to international standardization and also to make esports as like a sports. Okay, IeSF has no the intention to continue the world championship for every year. Okay? That means we are very open to discuss to make the governing body with all the international esports organizers, like the DreamHack, NRG, Esports World Cup. We are very open. But the thing I'm saying is we need some governing body which is sponsored not from the government, not from the private company, but from the government. And not only each government, as well as the existing sports the organization, okay, as like an IOC or the FIFA, I don't know, the F1, but that we have to discuss later. But anyway, that is the very important mission, and also that should be we have some answer for that.
Okay.
to make the esports
Thomas,
like a-
go ahead. I mean, yeah, please feel free to come in and
I
talk to
think
one
that's
directly.
a very important point. David talked earlier about how sports was created, and I think that's basically the American story, because in Europe, I think governmental support of different sports are so important, and especially for the grassroots, because you get basically all the funding from the governmental in some way, from the government, the local government. So on national level, I think it's more important with the federation kind of a federation body. I think it's most important on national level, because then you can start clubs, you can start teams, and you can get support directly. And that's not that far away compared to maybe Olympics is probably 10 or 20 years away. But I feel that that's an important piece, at least in Sweden. We want to see that.
Yeah.
But I think it's the value equation. If the governments are adding money to esports, well then sure, if it's coming from the government, how do you make sure that's equitable and goes across the board? But that's kind of the way government funds are. I think us in North America are looking at that like it doesn't happen. Yeah. And I mean, I know in Canada there's a lot of that, but in North America, it's I really think about it. If I've had international governments telling me anytime you take their money, they tell you how to use it, and that's not usually a good thing. That's actually stifling.
But DreamHack would never be able to get that. But with the federation, which is not a company, you can actually get that, because that's how football, how ice hockey, and all the big games in Sweden get their main or ground support. And I think that's important with the federation idea, that it's also another source of revenue, at least in Europe, maybe not in the US, but it's important to add, and that's why IeSF have important work to do.
I mean, Tomas, you're right, and is that the key as to why maybe we haven't had a federation yet, is that all of the different countries that run these things and all the different continents run things very differently. I mean, I've heard Alex very passionately say in the past how he believes that the role or the model of esports in North America should look like, and it's very much based around American sport. But those practices and those things don't run well in Europe. We don't run things like that. We don't do sharing of money, of profits and what have you. It's done a very different way. Do you guys think that maybe that's why we haven't had a federation? And if so, how do we overcome those obstacles?
Is it really that different? I mean, in Champions League, the teams that get further get more revenue share based on the media dollars.
Very true.
I agree with you that the revenue sharing structure is certainly different.
I'm not so much talking about the structure, more the mentality. And
it's
very common, for instance, for the league to own the teams.
I don't think we're too far apart there, actually, because I don't think that an NFL or Major League Baseball model works here. I think it's a golf, tennis model.
Okay. But in terms of NFL, they've got franchises and what have you, and it's the governing body, effectively, the NFL, that decides who has a team and who doesn't. Yep. In the English Premier League, for instance, those teams are the powerhouses. They run the league effectively through the Premier League. So we've got all these different fractured kind of sports. Or are we actually going down the wrong road completely? Are we trying to model ourselves on something that doesn't exist? Are we looking too hard at sports traditionally and thinking, actually, we need to be the same? I mean, Russell, do you agree or disagree with that? Do you think we actually need to look at this as a fresh thing?
I don't think we can say where we're going to be with a crystal ball in 5 years and try to legislate and organize what we don't know yet. And picking the wrong way can be stifling and kill it, because we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. I think, and I think there's obviously, Europe and North America and Korea have completely different structures for the mentality of things. I mean, could you have something with leagues and franchise rights? Yes. Could it be the tennis model? Yes. I think those are all out there, but I think we're still in a major growth phase, and I think that's the key to push forward, is growing the entire ecosystem, and we can carve out what we need to later on. But anything that stops the ecosystem from growing is not good.
I agree. I guess I would like to request a little clarification from both you and David on one point, which is that it doesn't seem like either of you, for example, are against sharing broadcast analytics or creating some kind of database for that, for example. If we were to do that, who is going to manage them? It's either going to be, I don't know, a union of teams or a union of events? Even just by focusing on that one point, we've already created a very small independent governing body. And that's why I'm saying, I don't think that it would be difficult at all for some very small specific things, even if it's just the circle is just this big right now, and everything else in the flowchart is huge, to create that kind of uniformity. Okay.
We're coming to the end of this particular session. It's been a fascinating session. I want to ask one more question. I'll come back to you in a moment. The final question is this. If we all in theory, if we all agree for a second that actually a federation is required, or a body, or a governing body, what are the next steps? What is the very next step when we walk out of this room? What do we need to do?
Create a model.
I'm sorry?
Someone needs to create a model, even if it starts with 2 little things or 1 little thing. I think that there are certain things that would take value away from nobody, that would give value to everybody, like absolute win-wins, even if it's just 1 or 2 very small little things that we could do that would help everybody.
Okay, Thomas, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think either the teams have to get together and start it, or either the events need to do it, but it can be on different layers, and as Alex said, it really needs a model where everybody gets something out of it.
Do we not have a model already called the G7? I mean, it's been a bit quiet recently, but...
I'm waiting for that to come out. No, I don't think, I mean, look, if you as an event are asking me to get a team union together, I mean, okay, but I think in the grand scheme of things, it'd be much better to do it together, like...
It's a dialogue. I mean, at least, thanks to DreamHack, we're all here, so we can talk about things, but whether it's, necessary or not, sure, there's some things that we can all get a value from working together, and I think it's dialogue as the next step.
Yeah. So you're open to the idea, even if you aren't necessarily in support of it?
Obviously, there's things that can be, there's pitfalls that can happen, but there's definitely good things that can come from it too.
Okay. David?
I think it has to bring a lot of value, because it has to be more than the amount of time I spend basically being part of that organization. So, just to make ends meet right now in the esports world is actually fairly difficult. So I actually admire what everybody is doing, because I know how difficult it is. So I'm actually more worried about the long-term sustainability of the sport. And until, that question is out of the way, I really don't want to focus that much of my energy on it.
Okay. And Juan, your final thoughts?
I think we should have a 2-track strategy. Okay? Profit-oriented the esports organization is very important. Okay? It's very important. DreamHack and MLG is very important. Another area is non-profit organizations like IeSF, also important in a long-term perspective. Right? On behalf of your the concerns and visions, IeSF do some role to the test. We can have the international governing body, as we now discussed. It's not an easy job, I think. Okay? Yeah. Since I started 2009 with just 9 countries founding members, by this year I have the 40 member countries. 40 member countries means in each country has their own association and federation, and their own federation association approved from the government. Right? So once they approved from the government, then I let them join the IeSF. So under the IeSF umbrella, 40 member countries means 40 association approved from each countries, representing esports in their country.
Yeah. I think the key is, sorry, I want to cut you off, but I think the key is that, and that's great, and I know that you've done an awful lot of work over the years, but even having national federations and a world federation still means these guys can go off and do their own tournaments. It makes no difference to them as to what. So how do we make that bridge?
I think it'll take some time. Okay. I think we cannot merge at once, right? As you know, the esports is still very infancy industry. It's not a big industry. Okay? In terms of the market volume, esports is still just a newborn baby compared with the other existing sports. So until we have some scale to discuss each other and share the strengths and weaknesses. Okay. With the private-owned the body and the non-private
okay.
The body.
So we're going to close this panel down now, but if you could just agree that you guys are going to go and have a chat after this, that would be some progress. Is that going to be happening?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, our first panel. Thank you. Thank you very much, guys. Very interesting all the way through. Some fascinating insight into what your thoughts are on this federation. And as I said to you before, this is just the beginning, and hopefully discussions will carry on throughout this day and over the weekend, and obviously over the next few years as well. My thanks to all 5 panel members: Russel Pfister, Suk Oh, Alex Garfield, Tomas Hermansson, and David Ting. Once more, ladies and gentlemen. Next up at 12 o'clock, local time, that's CET, so we're in about 25 minutes from now. We've got the second panel, which will feature Sam Matthews, Gordon Helgren, Christopher Mitchell, Matthew Donnell, and Michael O'Dell. They'll be discussing how brands find their target audience in eSports. That's eSports and marketing. That's coming up in around about 25 minutes from now. That's at 12 o'clock CET, so we'll see you then. We're going to take a very short break. Thank you very much.